This hearing will come to order. Before I offer my opening statement, I wanted to just summarize why we're here. In 2019, the last administration resurrected U.S. Space Command, which had been for about 20 years in STRATCOM. And at that time, it was determined that this new combatant command, which is separate and apart from Space Force, I can't overstate that, was going to need a headquarters. So in order to ensure for the American people and the various states that wanted to compete for that headquarters, a nationwide competition was held. After that, which Huntsville, Alabama was decided to be the winner. After that, there were some questions about the competition raised, so there was a second nationwide competition that was held. And so Huntsville was decided to be the winner in that one again, and Colorado Springs was placed fifth. There were some questions raised by the Colorado delegation about the administration inappropriately involving itself in that decision. The Biden administration conducted a GAO investigation, an Inspector General investigation, found that not to be the case. The last Secretary of the Air Force certified the decision that Huntsville was the winner of the first competition and should be the headquarters. This Secretary of the Air Force recommended to the President that Huntsville should be the permanent base. Then on July 31st of this year, the President announced that he had decided to take that decision from the Secretary of the Air Force, who we had been told for 2 years had the final authority on this, from the Secretary of Defense and from the Secretary of the Air Force. And the President decided to give it to the fifth place recipient, Colorado Springs. This is inexplicable, and that's what today's all about. The one reason the President cited for this decision was operational readiness. What you will find from today's hearing is that reason does not exist. With that, the committee will come to order. Today, we will examine the striking irregularities in the Biden administration's handling of U.S. Space Command headquarters. I want to thank the witnesses for being here and for their service to our nation. Unfortunately, the Biden administration has chosen to play politics with our national security. After a long and competitive national process, Huntsville, Alabama was selected as the best location to host the United States Space Command, or SPACECOM. Huntsville beat out other states in this order. Albuquerque, New Mexico came in second. Bellevue, Nebraska came in third. San Antonio, Texas came in fourth. And in fifth place, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Huntsville, Alabama was selected to host SPACECOM permanently. Since the end of that competition, which was validated by both the GAO and the Biden administration, IG, individuals within the Air Force and the Biden administration have attempted to circumvent the results and place SPACECOM's permanent base headquarters in Colorado Springs in the name of readiness. Let me be clear. This is not and has never been about readiness. General Saltzman, the general officer with day-to-day responsibility for readiness of more than 90% of our SPACECOM's assigned forces, says, quote, "It is my belief the permanent location of SPACECOM headquarters will not impact the readiness of the United States Space Forces," close quote. General Dickinson has stated that Colorado Springs is, quote, "unmatched," close quote, choice for recruiting civilians to work in SPACECOM, yet he currently employs over 360 contractors to fill civilian staffing shortfalls. Secretary Kendall's remarks highlight another issue that this administration's paper-thin readiness arguments does not meet. According to the Air Force documentation transmitted to the committee just 2 days ago, Colorado Springs is projected to cost $426 million more than Huntsville, Alabama, for the headquarters operations over the next 15 years. That's $426 million at least of weapons procurement, research and development, or maintenance for the rest of the DOD that this administration has decided to spend on their political manipulation. Hundreds of millions of dollars in readiness lost just so the President can try to endear himself to a purple state prior to next year's election. These most recent developments are just the latest in a string of delays and fuzzy math with one goal: whitewash the administration's decision to disregard the outcome of a competitive and deliberate selection process that Huntsville, Alabama won. The Alabama delegation and its members of this committee have conducted a long-term bipartisan oversight of the SPACECOM basing process. What we found has been alarming. Not only has the Biden administration dumped millions into Colorado to make it look competitive using, quote, provisional headquarters, they appear to have spent even more to legitimize those efforts. This year, I have demanded documentation and copies of DoD records to account for what has played out in the Pentagon and in Colorado Springs. They show that Spacecom has already spent $127 million in Colorado, including tens of millions to put up to 800 of our most critical space warfighting decision makers in an abandoned 41-year-old factory. Not on a military base, but 9.5 miles away from the base, not in a secure area, in an industrial building next to a middle school, around the corner from an apartment complex, and across the street from the neighborhood. And 90% of what's done in that building is classified. This leased space had no proper fence, obsolete security systems, inadequate facilities to handle the highly classified systems our space capabilities rely on. Documents obtained by this committee show that Colorado Springs is out of space and out of infrastructure despite this spending spree. Sensitive equipment is running in buildings without proper backup power, and there already is a massive office space shortfall on the bases in the Colorado Springs area. Despite these facts, on July 31st, President Biden decided that Spacecom should no longer move to Huntsville, Alabama, and would remain in its temporary location in Colorado Springs. The limited documentation provided to the committee doesn't shed much light on why the president picked a location with a 30% higher construction cost factors or built an enormous new headquarters building there. But I think the members of this committee know why. This administration has conveniently ignored the fact that the units providing nearly all of Spacecom's operational forces are not and were never planned to move regardless of the Spacecom headquarters. They're Space Force personnel in Colorado Springs that are not part of Spacecom. They also ignore the fact that Spacecom's functions have already moved once from Nebraska to Colorado when responsibilities were split out of Stratcom without problem. There is no justification for these actions except political considerations. It is indefensible to turn the fifth-place finisher into the winner of a basing competition. Finally, there's an elephant in the room. The Chinese aren't sitting still. This committee has heard time and again that the President Xi wants a military ready to forcibly overthrow the government of Taiwan by 2027. Secretary Kendall and Secretary Dickinson are sure to raise this point as a reason to, quote, stay the course in Colorado. This is a rhetorical game. If there is a war in 2027, General Dickinson's successor will likely fight it from the same headquarters he has today. Those headquarters are leased for the next 8 years. They were stood up to make sure that during the construction process of a permanent headquarters, there wouldn't be no diminution of readiness or operations. This provisional headquarters is and will remain fully capable for the next 8 years under existing leases. Everyone in this room knows that. The construction of a new permanent headquarters in Alabama will have no impact on the provisional headquarters' operational readiness. We had a nationwide competition to determine the best site for a permanent Spacecom headquarters. Both the Air Force Secretary, both the last Air Force Secretary and the current Air Force Secretary have concurred with and supported the competition results that Huntsville, Alabama is the best location for this permanent headquarters. We need to demonstrate to the American people that preparedness and not politics determines important investments like this and call for this competition result to be honored. With that, I yield to my friend and colleague from Washington State, the ranking member, for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, my chair is falling apart at me here. Just 3 points on this, as soon as I figure out how to get myself set up here. First, and I think the chairman illustrated this, this has been a horrible process. And one of the things that I think everyone on this committee and everyone in Congress, for that matter, is owed is an explanation for that, how exactly we bollocksed up a decision to build a command headquarters. It's not that we're not talking about a multi-billion-dollar weapon system here. As I understand, we're talking about building a building and locating roughly 1,400 people. And the process has been through 2 administrations, I will emphasize, just horribly messed up. And we need to hear more about how that happened and how to make sure that it never happens again. Second, the most important thing going forward is that we stop the bleeding here at some point and get forward actually working on what it is we're supposed to work on in terms of defending the nation instead of arguing endlessly about where to locate one, well, I guess it's probably more than one building, but anyway, it is one, just one building. But the third thing where I disagree with the chairman, I do not believe that either President Trump or President Biden made this decision based on politics. It's an unfortunate charge that both sides have thrown out there when the decision didn't go the way they wanted it to. I mean, I know a little bit about politics, and I just really can't imagine that some sort of election is going to be determined based on where one 1,400-person building is located, whether it's in Alabama or Colorado. So I don't think politics had anything to do with this. In fact, I think there were just two basic competing problems here. And yes, Huntsville, Alabama won the competition, but as I looked through the RFP on that, it seemed to simply come down to where is the cheapest place to build a building. Okay, and it is cheaper to build a building in Huntsville, Alabama than it is in Colorado Springs, or apparently in 5 or 6 other places. Is that really the only determining factor on where the best place to put Space Command is? I wouldn't think so. I would think that there would be other concerns, other things to think about. But the way it was structured, it basically said, you know, where's the cheapest place to build a building? I don't even know why you had the competition at that point. Anyone could have told you within like 30 seconds, Huntsville's going to be cheaper than Colorado Springs. So it's cheaper, yes. Is it better? And this is where the other side of it. It is not just politics. The people at Space Command don't want to move. Okay, they're in Colorado Springs. They've been there. They've set it up, and they don't want to move. I don't know exactly why. I don't think it has much to do with preferring Colorado Springs over Huntsville, Alabama. Moving is a pain, and if you don't have to do it, you'd rather not. At the end of the day, I think that's what it comes down to. And because and President Trump never, as he was sort of walking out of office, made this decision. Okay, it definitely should have been left to the next administration so that we didn't get into this back and forth thing. Again, it was thoroughly investigated. I don't see any evidence whatsoever that President Trump made that decision based on politics. But whatever that decision was, it certainly shouldn't have happened at the absolute last minute of his administration. But President Biden did not decide what he decided because of politics. He decided it because of the assessment that since you have the Space Command folks, the people who are actually doing the job, wanting to stay in Colorado, that was a balancing factor. That was why. But why we couldn't have simply decided this, I mean, just one final point. You know, the studies that looked into, well, was the Trump administration's decision, you know, within the rules, basically. The GAO, the IG looked into it. The determination on that came out over a year ago, and we waited a year to make the decision, just sort of twisting in the wind. See why, if we were going to do it, we couldn't have done it a hell of a lot sooner than that. So the decision-making process has been terrible. I believe that the quicker we can get through this, the better off we're all going to be. And lastly, I hope that people won't say, oh, it's politics on this side, it's politics on that side. No, it was cheaper to build it in Alabama, but folks wanted to stay in Colorado. You know, which one weighs more? You know, one group of people decided one way, one group of people decided the other way, and then there was a spectacular amount of unacceptable indecision and simply going, this is what we're doing, that made it all the more worse. So I look forward to the hearing, to getting some greater explanation and what I may be missing in that analysis, and hopefully getting to some reasonable answers and moving on with the mission. With that, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Now I'd like to introduce our witnesses. We have the Honorable Frank Kendall, Secretary of the Air Force, General James Dickinson, U.S. Commander of Space Command, General Chance Saltzman, the Chief of Space Operations, United States Space Force, and I welcome all of our witnesses. Secretary Kendall, let's start with you. You're recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. We've submitted a statement for the record, but I'll summarize briefly. Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and other distinguished members of the House Armed Services Committee, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. Any basing decision involves a balancing of different and often competing factors. In my judgment, the two most important factors in this basing action ultimately proved to be, one, the cost to the taxpayer of constructing and operating a new permanent headquarters facility at any of the 6 reasonable alternative locations, and two, the operational risk associated with any transition from the provisional headquarters in Colorado to another location. President Biden exercised his authority as Commander-in-Chief and Chief Executive to make the final decision to locate the permanent headquarters of U.S. Space Command in Colorado. I fully support the President's decision. I'd like to summarize how this decision came about. When I became the Secretary of the Air Force in July 2021, the preliminary designation of Huntsville, Alabama as a preferred alternative was under review by the Department of Defense Inspector General. and the General Accountability Office, the Government Accountability Office. I took no action while these reviews were underway. The DoD, IG, and GAO completed their reviews in the May 2022 timeframe. While neither review found any fundamental flaw in the identification of the preferred alternative of Huntsville, both found deficiencies in the process by which that decision was reached. The Secretary of Defense directed me on May 4th, 2022, to conduct a review of concerns expressed by senior military leaders regarding full operational capability for U.S. Space Command. Subsequently, I directed the Department of the Air Force Strategic Basing Team to conduct a thorough reevaluation of its basing analysis. There have been three core assumptions underpinning this basing action: the need for a 464,000 square foot facility, a workforce of 1,450 people, and new construction of a permanent headquarters building. The results of the reevaluation were consistent with earlier results. All 6 locations were reasonable alternatives, but Huntsville was lower cost, while remaining in Colorado posed the lowest operational risk. Under any circumstances, U.S. Spacecom would achieve its final operational capability, its full operational capability, in its current provisional location of Colorado Springs. As a result, the time to achieve FOC was not a major consideration, but the disruption associated with moving the headquarters became a factor to consider. There would be some operational risk associated with moving the provisional headquarters in Colorado to any other location. General Dickinson expressed the view that the operational risk was significant. The Department of the Air Force Strategic Basing Team believed that potential mitigation measures were available, and I concurred with that conclusion. In early April 2023, General Dickinson stated that he anticipated declaring full operational capability in the late summer of 2023, earlier than previous estimates, and he would do so without the construction of a new permanent headquarters building. I then asked General Dickinson to reconfirm Spacecom's current basing needs and whether there had been any changes. I also asked the Chief of Space Operations, General Saltzman, to provide his perspective on the basing action. The committee has been provided with General Dickinson's response. General Dickinson stated in part that Spacecom requirements have not changed and will soon be fulfilled at the command, as the command estimates declaring full operational capability in August 2023. That date has since slipped. Based on the accelerated threat in space and the progress in the command, selecting a final headquarters location other than Colorado Springs would greatly reduce readiness, levy significant cost, and impose high risk to mission in force. And finally, considering the threat, U.S. Space Command's pending full operational capability, and the situation as a whole, Colorado Springs should be the permanent location for U.S. Space Command headquarters. General Saltzman also provided his perspective on the basing action, which he has shared with the committee. I then sent a basing team to Colorado Springs to assess whether the Space Command headquarters could remain in its current configuration of leased and government-owned facilities. The team concluded that a new headquarters building was still necessary. Over the course of the Department of the Air Force's extensive reevaluation of the basing process, I have kept the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Council staff informed regarding the status of the basing team's analysis. After being informed that our President would make the final decision, I briefed the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Advisor on the results of the Department of the Air Force's review in June of 2023. Ultimately, my view was that the decision came down to a judgment about the operational risk associated with relocating versus the reduced cost of the leading alternative of Huntsville, Alabama. My assessment was that the projected cost savings, together with the availability of potential mitigation measures, outweighed the operational risks that have been identified. As a combatant commander, however, for Spacecom, General Dickinson assessed these considerations quite differently. On July 31st, 2023, the President announced his decision. I fully support the President's judgment in this matter. Given the intensifying threat, and with a final decision now having been made by the President, we are prepared to move forward with the implementation of this basing decision. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary. General Dickinson, you're recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, it is, as always, my honor to appear before you to represent the 18,000 men and women of United States Space Command. These patriots perform a vital mission on behalf of the American people. Vital because space enables our modern way of life and is critical to defending our nation. As I testified before the Strategic Forces Subcommittee in March, threats to a safe, secure, stable, and sustainable space domain are increasingly rapidly. Our strategic competitors, China and Russia, are fielding counter space capabilities designed to diminish U.S. influence and military effectiveness. Beijing and Moscow are fully aware of our advancements in space and the enormous benefits to be gained by advancing their own space capabilities while holding ours at risk. Since U.S. Space Command's establishment in August of 2019, readiness has been our priority. When I took command in the summer of 2020, then Defense Secretary Esper directed me to focus on operational readiness, and we responded to this direction by establishing a 24/7 Joint Operations Center, publishing the first ever SecDef-approved operational plan for space, and conducting our first Tier 1 exercise with U.S. Indo-PACOM, and validating our headquarters as a synchronized team of professionals. And this is just some of the achievements that we've accomplished. The U.S. Space Command headquarters basing decision has been realized following a deliberate and robust selection process. My role in this process was to identify the original headquarters requirements for the permanent location. As we awaited that decision, our command remained focused on our primary directive to be ready to fight and win in space whenever called upon. And we met our unified command plan directives to deliver space effects to the warfighter, protect and defend the space domain, and conduct trans-regional missile defense planning and operations support. By our second anniversary in August of 2021, we achieved initial operational capability at our provisional headquarters. And due to the diligent work and professionalism of our staff and components, we will soon reach full operational capability based on the command's ability to, first, execute our unified command plan missions, and in conjunction with conducting global campaigning exercises in response to crisis. Secondly, hold the requisite number of skills across our human capital. Third, leverage essential infrastructure to enable command and control across our mission and business functions. Fourth, execute necessary command processes, functions. And finally, set conditions and requirements for the future fight. Over the past 4 years, U.S. Space Command's growth and focus on readiness has translated into the accomplishments of significant tasks and milestones. U.S. Space Command works very closely with the Department of the Air Force, our designated combatant command support agency, to meet our obligations and initiate actions necessary to build our operational readiness. On July 31st, the President announced his decision for Colorado Springs, Colorado, as the permanent location for U.S. Space Command headquarters. I support the President's decision, which I believe will further enable the command to maintain mission readiness at the highest levels while imposing the least disruption to the force. In my view, selecting Colorado Springs as the permanent basing location for U.S. Space Command best sustains our human capital investments and ultimately maintains our readiness at the highest levels while imposing the least disruption to the mission and workforce. This is especially important as our pacing challenge, the PRC, is working to accelerate its modernization and develop the capabilities it assesses are needed to compel unification with Taiwan and counterbalance the United States by 2027. Our competitors are advancing swiftly with adversarial intent. U.S. Space Command will not slow down. We will meet that advance, and we really have no time to lose. Thank you.
Thank you. General Saltzman, you're now recognized for an open statement.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. As the Chief of Space Operations, I am the service chief responsible for the U.S. Space Force, the military service that secures our nation's interests into and from space. Along with the service chiefs from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps, I am also a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And as the Chairman has stated, the Space Force is a separate and distinct organization from U.S. Space Command, which is the combatant command tasked with planning, coordinating, integrating, synchronizing, assessing, and when directed by the President, executing global offensive and defensive space operations. As the Chief of Space Operations, I am the senior uniformed officer responsible for the organizing, training, and equipping of all Space Force forces serving in the United States and overseas. I am responsible for the generation of ready forces, which are presented to combatant commanders in order to execute missions on behalf of the Joint Force. At this time, the overwhelming majority of U.S. Space Force operational units are presented to U.S. Space Command through the Space Force Service Component,
called Space Operations Command. Space Operations Command consists of a headquarters element at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado Springs and subordinate organizations at a number of locations, which generate ready forces for missions in space domain awareness, electromagnetic warfare, missile warning, command and control, cyberspace operations, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, satellite communications, position, navigation and timing, and orbital warfare. As the Space Force Service Chief, I am typically only involved in the Department of the Air Force strategic basing process when U.S. Space Force units are under consideration. Because this basing action related to a joint headquarters for U.S. Space Command, I had only peripheral engagement in this matter, as described in my September 13, 2023 letter to the committee. I thank the Congress for their continued support of the U.S. Space Force, the Space Force mission, our guardians, and their families. Thank you.
I thank you, and I now recognize myself for questions. I want to start by emphasizing that when the President made his announcement on June 31st, the sole reason he gave for deviating from the competition results was General Dickinson indicating there would be a diminution in operational readiness, space readiness, if they were to move, period, full stop. General Saltzman just made reference to the fact that, and you can turn that time limit off, made reference to the fact that he didn't have a part in this, and he's right. The Space Force is separate and apart from Space Command. Space Command is a combatant command. He's here to emphasize what he just said in his opening statement, and that is the overwhelming operational readiness of our space capabilities is conducted by the Space Force in their Space Operations Center in Colorado Springs, which is not moving. And the portion that doesn't fall under his control is the small elements of space capabilities in the Army, Marines, and the Navy. They aren't moving. So this idea that moving Space Command is going to affect operational readiness is just fabricated. But that's the reason he's here, so people can understand that this service component, which provides bulk of the resources to General Dickinson's command, if needed, is not moving. That's one thing. General Saltzman, more than 90%, as I just said, of SpaceCom's operational forces are provided by the Space Force. Isn't it true that it makes no difference to readiness whether SpaceCom is in Colorado, Alabama, Nebraska, or Texas? Because those units that you have are not going anywhere. You wrote me a letter September 13th saying, "It is my belief that the permanent location of SpaceCom headquarters will not impact the readiness of U.S. Space Forces," close quote. On April 13th, you wrote Secretary Kendall, quote, "Regardless of the U.S. Space Command headquarters location, there is very little operational risk to the space missions currently being executed," close quote. Are those not your statements?
Yes, sir, those are my statements.
General Saltzman, as you know, the service components are responsible for the underlying readiness of their respective units. Those units are then offered up to the combatant command for use in operations. Isn't it a fact that you retain ultimate responsibility for over 90% of those forces assigned to U.S. SpaceCom?
I have the responsibility to generate readiness for the Space Force forces assigned to U.S. Space Command.
And those are in Colorado Springs, and they are not moving no matter where the Space Command headquarters is located.
They are in a number of locations, including Colorado Springs, and are not moving.
Correct. Secretary Kendall, first, I want to applaud you. You did what you thought was right, regardless of the political pressure that you knew was being exerted, and I know that it was being exerted on General Dickinson. And I want to go to the most important thing you said in your opening statement, and that is, after considering all these factors, including General Dickinson's observations, my assessment was that the projected cost saving, together with the availability of potential mitigating measures, outweighed the operational risks that had been identified, and the combatant commander for the U.S. SpaceCom, General Dickinson, assessed. You considered these factors and then did what you were assigned to do, and that's come up with the best location. And again, I can't overstate this. Why have a nationwide competition if we're just going to disregard it? But you didn't, and you're to be applauded. I understand that you serve at the pleasure of the President, and you're going to say yes, sir, and salute when he decides to do something different. But I will emphasize that for the last 2 years, the Secretary of Defense has told this committee and told me that the decision on where the base basing was going to be, the permanent basing of Spacecom, was solely in the purview of the Secretary of the Air Force, and whatever he decided was going to be final. That did not change until the Secretary of the Air Force started indicating in late June that he was probably going to pick Huntsville. That's when all of a sudden efforts were made to get General Dickinson to invigorate his arguments that we've seen here today to give the president a plausible toehold to take away this decision. But as you've just heard from General Saltzman, there is no effect on operational readiness, no matter where Spacecom is. General Dickinson, I had the chance to come out and visit you in late August and had you take me through all of your buildings. Over 1,000 of your 1,400 employees are in rented spaces off base. Is that not correct?
It's not quite 1,000, but it's about 800.
800, I thought, were in the Bay Area building. Aren't there another 200 in Newport?
So Bayfield.
Yeah, I've got Bayfield
About
lease.
800 in Bayfield, and then the Newport is about 210.
210, yeah. So of the 14 that you're 100 you're expected to have, you're going to have over 1,000 of those in two locations, one 4.5 miles off base and the other 9.5 miles off base. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
And most of the work done in both those buildings is classified, isn't it?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, as you've heard me say in my opening statement, they're in residential areas, they're near schools, they don't have fences around them. This operation, this facility needs to be in a base. The competition that Huntsville, Alabama won was going to put the building inside Redstone Arsenal in one state-of-the-art building that was one big skiff, which is what it should be. Now, General Dickinson, I met with you, and when I came out there, I said, I want you to show me everything that you do out here, all your buildings, and we went through all the buildings. And I asked you, is there anything that you're doing out here that will be interfered with by the construction of a new headquarters building in Huntsville, Alabama, 5 states away? And as I understand, it's going to take 5 years to build this new headquarters. Is there anything about that construction process that would interfere with your operations in Colorado Springs? And your answer to me was no, sir. Is that correct?
Chairman, and thank you again for coming out and seeing the great folks working in U.S. Space Command during your visit. And for the brick and mortar piece of it that we talked about, building the physical building itself to the standards that we need, won't have a direct impact on readiness in Colorado Springs until we look at the transition of the workforce and the mission sets from Colorado Springs, in this case, to Huntsville.
Which
Then
would be
you will-
5 years out.
It could be 5 years out, if that's what it's determined to be the build time for that.
Right.
But Chairman, I would tell you that as we get ready for that move, there will probably be civilian, the 60% of the headquarters that's civilians, where folks will start making decisions that they no longer want to work there and seek employment elsewhere, given the predictability and their personal desire that they would not want to go to Huntsville, for
That's right.
example.
And that's what I asked you there, because you just skipped past my question, and that is, I asked you, is there anything about the construction process in Huntsville, Alabama over the next 5 years that will interfere with your operations here in Colorado Springs? And you said, no, sir. But then I asked you, I said, well, why would you tell the president that it could affect operational readiness? And that's when you told me, well, as we get closer to the move, some of the civilians may not want to move. Well, clearly, as the secretary said, there are mitigating factors. You got 5 years to plan it, and you're moving to the Rocket City, one of the most high-tech cities in America. You're going to find a ready workforce, particularly when you got 5 years to plan it. So that is not a reason. But even aside from that, as we've already found out, most of the operational, day-to-day operations are conducted by the Space Force. But now I want to go back to a meeting that we had June 7th in the Capitol, where you met with the Alabama delegation and about 20 staffers. And we were talking about this, concern about operational readiness. And you told me that the reason you stood up this provisional headquarters was to ensure that while a new headquarters was being built, no matter where it was being built, there would be no interruption to operational readiness. And that's the purpose of the provisional headquarters. And that you had 10-year leases, which are now closer to 8, to make sure that there was more than enough time and to ensure that operational readiness was carried out by your command and there would be no interruption. Have you not achieved that goal? That you have an operationally functioning command that's not going to be affected by construction of a headquarters in another state?
I have an operating command right now in the provisional facilities in Colorado Springs.
That's right. And if we were to have a conflict with Taiwan in 2027, you'd be ready for it, or your successor would be, because I know your time is up.
We would be.
All right. Secretary Kendall, when you spoke with the Alabama, before I leave that point, I want to go back to that June 7th meeting. In that June 7th meeting, after you told me that you had stood that up to make sure you were ready to prevent any kind of readiness interference, I ask you, can you envision any circumstance in which you would recommend Colorado Springs for the permanent basing location for SpaceCom? And your direct answer to me was, no, sir. Is that not correct?
Chairman, there was a misunderstanding in that meeting.
But that was your answer to me, was it? I asked you a direct question. If you want to follow it up with an explanation, but was that not your answer to me?
Chairman,
You're under oath, sir.
Chairman, I had a misunderstanding with how that question was.
What was your answer to me?
Chairman, I go back to, I had a misunderstanding with what was asked of me of that.
That was a
meeting,
pretty clear question.
Which I clarified in.
No,
writing.
you didn't. The next day, you emphasized that the decision rested with the Secretary of the Air Force. You did not mean to infer who should win. I asked you if you would, under any circumstances, recommend Colorado Springs, and you answered, no, sir. And then you went on to explain that Colorado Springs was just set up to be a temporary provisional headquarters while the new headquarters is being built. But you're right. The letter you sent me the next day said, I want to make sure you understand I was not impeding the decision of the Secretary of the Air Force, who is going to make the decision. We thought, until the President decided he didn't like the results. But that is what you told me, and just I want you to know you're under oath. Do not deny that, because that would be perjury.
Again, Mr. Chairman, that was a misunderstanding on my behalf.
That was a very clear
the
question.
answer I gave.
That was a very clear question, General, and you knew exactly what your answer was.
But I did
Secretary
not.
Kendall, when you spoke to the Alabama delegation on May 23rd, you said unequivocally that you had been given the decision authority for SpaceCom. On June 8th, you wrote me a letter, quote, I am committed to making a decision. This is the best long-term interest of the Department of Defense, close quote. According to your testimony, you were told that, quote, the President would make the final decision, close quote. At some point between June 8th and June 30th, we know from your testimony that you preferred sending the SpaceCom headquarters to Huntsville. When were you told that the President would be making a decision instead of you?
Chairman, it was shortly before the decision was made.
Okay. Were you given any reasons?
The reason is the one that the President has publicly stated, that concerns about readiness, and the readiness manifests itself in the transition process of moving to another location, and as General Dickinson indicated, losing civilian workforce and then having to reestablish a trained workforce at the new location.
Okay, I will wait for my second round of questions later. I just want to pause right here and emphasize, General Saltzman said he takes care of daily readiness, almost all of it, what the Navy and the Army and the Air Force don't do, which is very small. General Kendall said he considered General Dickinson's concern and found that they were not overriding and they were mitigating factors. General Dickinson just acknowledged he's ready to operate for the next 8 years, no matter where the headquarters is going. And all he needs is to be concerned about replacing maybe some civilian personnel who may not want to move, but he's got 5 years to do it. There is no readiness concern. I yield to the ranking member for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield my time now to the gentlelady from Alabama, Congresswoman Sewell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much, colleague Courtney. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. And let me start off by saying that Huntsville, Alabama is unequivocally the best place for Space Command, not because it's cheaper, although that's really important, cost savings, but because of superior competency and an able and ready workforce. Huntsville is synonymous with space. Its nickname is the Rocket City. It is the home of the Space and Missile Defense Command, NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, Missile Defense Agency, and Missile and Space Intelligence Center. The city has more engineers per capita than anywhere else in this nation, and we're proud of that in Alabama. No place is more equipped, competent, capable, and better suited to headquarter the Space Command than Huntsville, not just because it's cheaper, but because of superior competencies and an able and ready workforce. Through 2 extensive competitions, DoD agreed with this assessment. Huntsville came in first place of those competitions, while Colorado came in 4th and 5th. Let me repeat. A competition is held for a reason. Criteria are given. And when one particular location meets all of the boxes, including operational readiness, and was chosen first, to go with 4th and 5th, you know, we are a competitive state in Alabama. We love our football. Number 1 means number 1. DoD, IGA, the DoD's IG found that the process Air Force used, quote, compiled with law and policy, was reasonable in identifying Huntsville as the preferred permanent location, end quote. Additionally, there has been a Republican and a Democratic Secretary of the Air Force, and both have found Huntsville to be the best location. The evidence is overwhelming, gentlemen, and undeniable. While Space Command needs to be in Huntsville, we've made a political decision over a competency decision. And I know that this administration strives for equity, strives to be fair, and this is simply unfair. I want to focus on workforce and labor issues that I found in your assessment to select Colorado over Alabama. General Dickinson, you asserted that you believe moving Space Com headquarters would impact readiness through a loss of civilian hires. But Secretary Kendall supported moving to Huntsville because DoD could mitigate operational risk using temporary supporting staff. You do so now, you've done so in the past, and you will continue to do so using temporary staffing support. The fact is that we could move to Huntsville, build a new headquarters, pay for staffing mitigation to buy down risk, and still come out hundreds of millions of dollars ahead. General Dickinson, isn't it a fact that we could spend every dime projected in mitigation costs and still come out ahead financially by moving to Huntsville?
Congresswoman, I'd address your question in this regard is that 60% of the headquarters today is civilians, whether Department of the Air Force civilians doing great work for us. We know if we were to move, for example, that we would believe about 88% of those folks would probably not move.
Did you conduct any new workforce analysis of the Alabama labor market?
I believe the Secretary of the Air Force did during his basing process.
Did you support and provide the committee any statistical evidence to support a claim that the workforce in Huntsville, Alabama, or in the state of Alabama was inadequate? Either of you. Secretary Kendall?
Now, the workforce was adequate. It would need to be trained, of course, for the specific rules.
I want to say, Mr. Chairman, beyond everything we've discussed today, another major concern I have in the Air Force decision to locate Space Command in Colorado is that it would geographically cut off diverse talent pipeline for military and civilian personnel. Alabama is the home of 14 HBCUs, the most in the country. Colorado is the home of 0. Alabama's population is 27% African American, while Colorado's is only 4%. This makes a difference when recruiting personnel. In Huntsville, Alabama, the Space and Missile Command recruits students from Alabama A&M down the road in Huntsville, Alabama, bringing them into the internship program, fostering their full-time employment, and creating an able, ready workforce. I hope that we can move away from politics and look at the facts. And the facts are that Huntsville will be a better location, the best location for Space Command. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady, and I'd also emphasize they get a lot of engineering graduates from Tuskegee in my district. Chairman, a gentleman from Colorado Springs is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Secretary Kendall, General Dickinson, and General Saltzman for testifying before the committee today, and I commend Chairman Rogers for calling this hearing. I have had serious concerns about flaws in the Air Force's role in the basing decision process from the very beginning. Both the DoD Inspector General and the GAO reports stated that the Air Force process deviated from prior basing decisions. It focused on secondary factors rather than America's readiness to exert space dominance. Sure, housing costs, school districts, and such matters are important, but not as important as military readiness. As an aside, I do want to go on record to say that even in these secondary considerations, Colorado Springs takes a back seat to no one. After all, according to a popular ranking, it is one of the 10 most desirable places to live in the entire United States and has been for each of the last 6 years. People who live in Colorado Springs are fiercely loyal to it and will not move away, no matter how attractive an alternative may be. This loyalty means that moving Space Command anyplace else, no matter where that would be, would produce a dramatic attrition in the civilian portion of the trained workforce at Space Command. Significantly, the Inspector General's report, I have a copy of it right here, cited the site selection findings that stated that when FOC, or full operational capability, was considered, Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs rose to the top of the list. I repeat, when full operational capability was considered, Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs rose to the top of the list. That's on page 19 of Part 2 of the Inspector General's report. Quote, this assessment supports the selection of Colorado Springs as the preferred alternative and Huntsville as the feasible alternative, end quote. Page 19 of the Inspector General's report. But no matter where in the Air Force site selection rankings Colorado Springs or Huntsville or any other location are placed, at the end of the day, it is only academic. The Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump in January 2021 and Joe Biden today, makes the final decision. The site selection rankings are only advisory, and the President can give them as much or as little weight as he wants. Now, before I ask General Dickinson about the importance of FOC in readiness, I have two quick questions I want to ask the entire panel. Hopefully, this is just a yes or no answer for the sake of time. First of all, do you support the decision of the President? General Saltzman, or General Secretary Kendall?
Yes, I do.
General Saltzman?
I can support implementation of the President's decision.
And General Dickinson?
Yes, I do. I support this decision.
And secondly, did the President have the authority to make this basing decision? Secretary Kendall?
Yes, you did.
General Saltzman?
Yes, sir.
And General Dickinson?
Yes, he did.
Okay, and finally, General Dickinson, why is reaching FOC as soon as possible so important, and how many years would it take to duplicate that somewhere else if it could even be done? And I ask, I yield to you.
So what we've seen over the last 4 years, and the command just turned 4 years in August, we have seen a rapid growth in capability and capacity, in particular by the PRC. And so what we've looked at over the last 2 years since the January 21 meeting was that we've seen increases in counter space capabilities by the Chinese, dual-purpose satellites, direct-descent satellites. We have seen electromagnetic interference by the Russians. We've seen a whole host of increases in capability and capacity by our competitors. In response to that, I saw the need that we needed to accelerate and move quickly towards FOC so that the strategic level command of U.S. Space Command was trained and ready. And that included bringing on, hiring a workforce and training and certifying that workforce. And we have done so over the last 2 years in terms of having events, exercises, actually real-world events that have pushed us to FOC. and I expect that we will achieve FOC later this calendar year. But in terms of the workforce, I can't emphasize enough how important it is that we have a trained and ready workforce. And that workforce provides the command and control, the direction, and the leadership of all of the forces that General Saltzman provides, plus the other services to the combatant command. And so moving that would create that operational risk that we were talking about today, in that you would take a trained and ready workforce and then have to move them to another geographic location, which would create risk that I have as a combatant commander in the performance of the UCP missions I've been given by the President.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chairman, I recognize the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Slotkin, for any question. Gentlelady passes. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us today. I think as we watch how this decision-making has unfolded, we now see an example of how not to make a decision in these realms. We know that we live in a town that's political, but we expect these decisions not to be made within the political realm. I think that what we're seeing here today, unfortunately, is politics entering into this. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Strong.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Whitman. I'm disappointed that Chairman Rogers had to call a hearing to get answers that we've been seeking for months. As I've been saying for years, Redstone Arsenal was, is, and remains to be the best possible location for U.S. Space Command and national security. This isn't an opinion. This isn't speculation. It's a fact supported by the Air Force basing process, a GAO report, a DOD Inspector General report, the Air Force Strategic Basing Team reevaluation in 2022, the Air Force Strategic Basing Team reevaluation in 2023. Huntsville came in first place and Colorado Springs came in fifth, 5 separate times. I'd be willing to bet that no other point in U.S. history did a president willingly select the 5th best option for our men and women in uniform. It's never happened. General Dickinson, I understand you're concerned about workforce retention and believe that a move would pose unnecessary risk to readiness. The military moves constantly. You know it. As you also know, the breakdown of your personnel is roughly 60% civilian, 40% military. Every analyst shows that SpaceCom personnel, especially military personnel, would be better off in Huntsville, Alabama. We are grateful for our civilian workforce, but if they don't want to move, they don't have to. And we won't force them because there are new people waiting to take these jobs. I'm looking forward to asking questions soon and yield back the remainder of my time to Mr. Whitman.
He left. A gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't really have a dog in this fight because I'm from Georgia. And while Alabama's got pretty good football teams, Alabama had pretty good football teams. But I am very concerned about what happened here. And I have 2 Air Force bases. I have seen basing decisions made where there's always a tremendous amount of detail, and sometimes my bases have been selected and sometimes others have been selected. But I have accepted that the process works in the best interest of the DOD and our national security. And the DOD has historically been one of the most respected institutions, not just in America, I mean our DOD, America's DOD, but in the world. And I think it is because up to and until recently, for the most part, they've kept politics out of the decisions. What Mr. Lamborn said is President Trump had the authority to make the decision, and President Biden has the authority to make the decision. The problem with that is if we go down that path, and that's the way the decisions are going to be made, then when you have a Republican president, the missions are going to be put in red states, and when you have a Democratic president, the missions are going to be put in blue states, and a political agenda is going to end up destroying the effectiveness of our DOD and our national security. And Secretary Kendall, how many basing decisions does the Air Force make in a given year?
I don't have the exact number, but we make several.
Do you know approximately how many have been made since you've been Secretary?
I would say at least a dozen.
In any of those other than this one, has the President given you a directive of where the mission was going to be?
No, Congressman, this is very unusual, non-standard in many ways. It's a combatant command, first of all, and we rarely do a combatant command. So I was acting as an agent of the President and Secretary of Defense in this case. It also went through an unusual process. We started out with the standard Air Force basing process, but Secretary Esper and the previous administration changed that process rather fundamentally and asked each state essentially to put in a bid for the headquarters. So the basing team stopped the process it was normally conduct and then conducted the process directed by Secretary Esper. And that produced 6 ultimately candidates. And then in the Trump administration, again, there was a decision which involved a meeting in the Oval Office with the President. So this started out very non-standard. And then we have the DOD and IG investigation. So this is nothing like a normal basing decision as far as I'm concerned.
I'm down to 2 minutes. I certainly respect you, but it appears political to me. And before I say what I'm about to say, I want you to know I disagree with the way Senator Tuberville did things. I also disagree with Senator Schumer not taking other actions that were available to him to go ahead and get our commanders in position. I think there's blame with Senator Tuberville. I think there's blame with Senator Schumer. Blame on both sides on what's happened. But I disagree with what Senator Tuberville did. But to me, my concern is it looks like it's payback from the President of the United States. And payback's a very dangerous game to play. Nobody wins when there's payback. And if we're going to get to the point that politics is going to determine where the mission goes, then what you're going to see is that the people who sit on the top row up here are going to put missions in their districts, and then when it flips, the missions are going to move to somewhere else. This is a dangerous game. And I really, you answered my question. Since you've been there as Secretary, and I think you've done a good job, the President has never done what Joe Biden did in this case. Is that correct?
I think it's unusual for a president to intervene in a basing decision in any case, and it was done by President Trump.
Would you agree with my concern then, and I apologize for interrupting, that if we continue down this path, if you have a Republican president that turns around and does the same thing, I mean, you could 18 months from now have a Republican president that comes in and says, you know what, I'm changing the basing decision that Joe Biden made, and so I'm going to turn around and put it in Huntsville. And then 4 years from now, you have another one come in that says, well, I'm changing what the last president said. If we don't follow the process, our national security is going to suffer as a country. And with that, I'll yield.
I thank the gentleman. Before I go to our next Democrat witness, I do want to address something that was mentioned by my friend from Colorado. I challenge him to show me where the word advisory was ever uttered or written in correlation with the competition of the states for the permanent basing of Space Command. It was a competition for the basing, not an advisory competition. With that, I recognize the gentlelady from Alabama for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say for the record that I am an ardent supporter, passionate supporter of President Biden. And what I believe is that President Biden wasn't given all the facts when he made that decision. And I think that as a man of integrity, as a man who literally loves this country, would put his life on the line for this country, he would want to know all the facts in making a decision. So, General Dickinson, I want to know, did President Biden know that you told the entire Alabama delegation, I was sitting there myself, when asked by Chairman Rogers about operational readiness, that it would not be affected if it went to Alabama? You said, quote, no, sir. Did he know that?
I can't tell, I don't know if the president knew that or not.
I think that we have to give this president the full information. Secretary Kendall, you said early on, or after your assessment, that Huntsville was the best location. You chose that when you had the authority to do so, right?
The basic process that I ran and my judgment was that when I weighed operational considerations versus costs and other factors, that Huntsville was the preferred location.
Yes.
But
And
General
so,
Dickinson did not agree with that. Both of our positions were made clear, I believe, to the White House.
are you sure?
And
Did he have full information?
Yes, I am sure.
Did he know that 5 times Huntsville was chosen over Colorado?
Congressman, in all due respect, I don't think that's accurate. The IG and GAO reviewed the actions of others. Those weren't separate selection
Yeah, the
processes.
IG did so because Colorado, the delegation from Colorado, insisted that Trump was being political in this process. Look, I don't want to talk about politics. I really just want to talk about the facts. And I truly believe that Huntsville is the preferred location because it's the best location. And to say that you don't have temporary staff, that you don't go out and look for temporary civilian staff to fill your workforce gaps is absolutely summarily wrong. You do, don't you?
Yes, but all of the 6 locations that we were considering were acceptable and could have accommodated the headquarters. They were all viable. Huntsville
Right.
did come out
And
first
so-
by some of the standards, particularly cost. But Colorado was a very acceptable location, and there
But
was
cost was really
there
a
was
factor.
risk associated with moving from Colorado to any other location. That was recognized from the beginning of the process.
So why even have a process if you know that you're going to choose the location that they're currently in? We spent how many man hours, how much of the taxpayer money did we spend in this competition, in this re-examination, in this investigation? And I'm sorry, to go back to the same place that it's in, what was that about? Why have a competition?
Yeah, following the GAO and the IG investigations, there were a number of things that they pointed out that were deficiencies, if you will, in the process. They found no fundamental flaw with what was done, but there were some deficiencies. There was also the issue that was raised about the disruption associated with moving and
Yes, sir.
what full operational capability and achieving that would do to the decision. So
Yes,
there's
sir.
some things
Can
we had to go back
Can I
and
just
look
say,
at.
though, that overarching all of this, the American people, we do a disservice to the American people to see Alabama versus Colorado battling it out on this at this hearing. I just want you to know that it's not about politics. I literally, and I know that the workforce, that the able, ready workforce that is there in Huntsville can more than accommodate the operational readiness that's being at issue. And operational readiness only came about like what, months before the president made the decision? So I just want to ask a question, General Dickinson, is it correct that you are still using contractors to fill a shortfall in your civilian workforce right now in Colorado Springs? And isn't it accurate to reflect that long-term cost of staying in Colorado, you would still have civilian and contractors to fill voids?
Congresswoman, it is true that we are using contractors right now to fill out a portion of the workforce. And that is a standard practice as you're standing up a new organization. It is very common across other combatant commands to have a contractor force as well. And so as we look to hire, continue to hire and fill in the command, we will continue to use contractors.
Well, I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, that politics aside, this is really, I am in full support of President Biden. We'll be voting for him again, but I just think that he was not given the full range of information to make the right decision, because if he had, he would have chosen Huntsville. Thank you.
I completely agree. I think that the president unfortunately relied on General Dickinson's observation, which he has just demonstrated is not accurate. Whoever follows you as combatant commander is also going to be a 4-star general who's going to have 5 years and can use contractors if they need to if some of the people don't want to move. There is no readiness concern here, no basis for the president to interfere with these competition results. And I do agree that the president shouldn't have been given that information, and he would have supported then Secretary Kendall's recommendation, which was also the recommendation of his previous Air Force Secretary. I recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Desjardins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and I appreciate our witnesses for being here today. Secretary Kendall, yeah, I appreciate the forthright manner in which you laid out your decision-making process as it pertains to U.S. Space Command. You indicated in your statement that the cost savings associated with locating Space Command in Huntsville is what carried the day for you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In April, you told the House Appropriations Committee that there was no indication that President Biden would meddle in the decision of where the Space Command was to be located. And you said, I quote, "Lloyd Austin delegated it to me, and that's where it stays today." When did you learn that this decision was out of your hands and would be made by the White House instead?
It was shortly before the president made the decision.
I'm sorry, it was
It
when?
was shortly before the president made the decision.
Okay. Was Secretary Austin the one who informed you of this change, or did it come from the White House?
It came through the chain of command,
Can you say who?
through the Secretary of Defense's office.
Okay. And what did they say to you?
Nothing more than that the president would be making the decision.
Were you informed, I'm sorry, you may have answered this. Were you informed that the White House would be the ultimate decision maker before or after they learned of your preference for Huntsville over Colorado Springs?
I'm not going to go into the details of the decision-making process and how it played out, but as I said in my testimony, I kept the National Security Advisor, the National Security staff at the White House and the Secretary of Defense's office both fully informed throughout this process.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, you'd explained to them that there were mitigation concerns and that you could remedy some of General Dickinson's concern over operational risk, among other things, and why it was more strategically advantageous to have it in Huntsville than Colorado Springs. But yet, in your opening statement, you said that you fully support the president's decision. How can that be when, up until it wasn't your decision, that you supported Huntsville?
The committee has a copy of my briefing, which went to the Secretary of Defense and National Security Advisor and fully communicates my views. At the end of the day, this was an operational decision about operational risk versus cost. The President's the Commander-in-Chief. I'm not. General Dickinson is the commander of a combatant command. He has a direct operational responsibility, and I do not. General Saltzman shares with me the responsibility to provide ready forces. They have a different perspective, and they have the authority to make this decision based on their assessment of risk, and I respect that. So while I might have come to a different conclusion, there was adequate basis in the whole record. Going all the way back to when President Trump made the earlier decision, full operational capability and the time to achieve that was a major factor that was added late in that process to the decision-making process.
Well,
So operational
I share
concerns
my
have been-
concerns with the gentleman from Georgia who just mentioned that one thing I enjoyed about this committee was that when witnesses like yourselves come before us, your job is to give your best military advice to the President or the Commander-in-Chief. We just have one Commander-in-Chief. He's ours, regardless of what side of the aisle it was on. It sounds like you gave your best military advice, and that was not taken, but yet you still fully support the President, and that kind of almost partisanship concerns me. General Dickinson, you're a native Coloradoan, born in Colorado, grew up in Colorado, went to school in Colorado, cheer for the Broncos, even though they lost 70-20. Did you have a personal preference for Space Command being located in Colorado?
I did not.
That's interesting because I'm from Tennessee, I'm not from Alabama. I have a personal preference for it being in Huntsville because I border Alabama and I have a lot of constituents that go there. All things being equal, I would have a preference for my own area, where I'm from and the people who would benefit from that. But things weren't equal. Huntsville was proven to be the better choice. And so I don't have to feel guilty about my personal preferences, but you're saying that you didn't have a personal preference, but I'll take you at your word. The reversal seemed to be based, at least in part, on your statement that U.S. Spacecom would be fully operational earlier than previously thought in August of 2023. Is U.S. Space Command fully operational?
Congressman, we are not fully operational capable at this moment. I anticipate that we will be so here by the end of the calendar year. And the reason I'm continuing to review and assess the command is two reasons. One is we received an additional Unified Command Plan task in the latest one that came out in May of this year, which is Trans-Regional Missile Defense. So I'm assessing to make sure that I've got the proper functions and personnel within the headquarters to be able to do that task.
If the chairman would indulge me just for 10 seconds, I would say that I don't share the same confidence in the ranking member and others that this is not a political decision. It's pretty clear how the state of Alabama votes. It's pretty clear how the state of Colorado votes. It's a swing state, and I personally believe that there is political bias in this decision, and that is detrimental to our military readiness. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Michigan, General Bergman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Kendall, let's start with the positive, okay? I'm pleased with the Air Force's recent decisions to expedite the cleanup of the PFAS releases at the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base in Oscoda, Michigan. I commend your department for taking these necessary actions, albeit we could have moved a little faster, but nonetheless, you know, we're moving in the right direction. However, this is just a start to ensure that everyone there has safe drinking water. You know, the time for study is long since over. The time for action is now. It's imperative that the Air Force continues to the remediation with the sense of urgency that the situation rightly deserves. And I implore you, please continue to keep us updated on the next steps as an open and transparent process is imperative to keeping the public informed, because you know the rumor mill, rumor mills are never good news. So the sooner we can dialogue with the Department of the Air Force and the updates, it's going to help us message to the citizens there in the area about all the good things that are happening. So thank you for that. You know, kind of changing gears to the topic at hand here. In all my years, I've never seen a process that was kind of so blatantly disregarded when it came to the time to making a final decision. By the way, just as an aside, my first BRAC I was involved in was 1979. Okay, not this isn't a BRAC, but the idea of the emotion that goes into creating or downsizing or remissioning bases, and it really does become a very emotional, very parochial, very, you know, guard your ground situation. And you know, we've heard the word readiness consistently used as a reason for or a reason not to. And I would suggest to you, in fact, you just used the term ORM. And I assume that still stands for Operational Risk Management. Is that a true statement? I heard ORM used here in the last couple of minutes. But anyway, if I misheard, then let's consider Operational Risk Management. We have to, first of all, before we manage any risk, we have to assess the risk. I would suggest to you what I saw here in how this process is played out. It's not operational risk management, it's organizational risk management. In other words, bureaucracies, protecting needless bureaucracies at the expense of the operating forces and the readiness thereof. That concerns me, and any bureaucracy is capable of devolving into that and then using someone else or some other entity as the scapegoat for their bad decisions. What's at risk here is the readiness of our families. Sure, we can talk about our readiness to fight, our readiness to respond, but families don't need to be whipsawed back and forth by bureaucratic, if you will, jousting. And that's where, when you think about our military members whose spouses there's like 7 times the national unemployment rate because of the challenges with moving families around. The idea of making this decision, making it early, making it for the right reasons, and sticking with it rather than get it into a politicization, if that's the right word. I probably added an extra syllable in there. But the point is, that is not only ethically wrong, but it's morally wrong on the part of the readiness for the families itself. So I guess the one thing that is, again, as I listened to you all speak, and I know this didn't really end up with much questions, but the question is, can anybody tell me what percentage long-term you plan to use contractors for? Are you going to have an 80-20 workforce, 90-10, 70-30? Because contractors really don't care. Contractors, you let a contract and they go to work wherever the hell it is, okay? What's the long-term plan for use of contractors?
So, Congressman, the way the headquarters is organized right now, 60% of them are civilians. In this case, they're the Department of the Air Force civilians. 40% are military. The contractors help us in terms of the shortage we may have in the workforce on the civilian side in terms of being able to do those types of functions for us. Ideally, you eventually wean yourself off the contractor force as you fill out the rest.
Is over the long term, is the contractor force less capable and more expensive? More capable, less, than a civilian workforce? Because with contractors, you have speed of movement when it comes to changing if something changes where you don't necessarily have that within your civilian workforce. Thoughts?
So I would answer that by saying that it's a function, the number of contractors is a function of how many people you're trying to recruit and hire and train. Okay. And they are a little bit more mobile, if you will, in terms of their functions and the ability to bring them on the team.
Yep, gentleman's time expired.
Yep, thank you.
I will make the point. The fact is you're using 360 contractors now to fill positions. As I said earlier, whoever follows you is going to be a four-star general. Got 5 years to plan. At the time that you get ready to move to the new permanent headquarters in Alabama, if all the civilians don't want to go, you can do what you're doing now and do what Secretary Kendall found and use mitigating ways of getting contractors to fill those spots. This is not in any way going to diminish the operational readiness of Space Command when that move occurs. Gentleman from New York, do you have any questions? Okay. I think then we'll go to gentleman from Florida, Mr. Waltz, for 5 minutes. Mr. Strong from Alabama is recognized. I thought Mr. Waltz was up next. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Dickinson, in April, you informed Secretary Kendall that Space Command would reach full operational capability this summer in secure workplaces with network connectivity all the way to the special access program levels, our most highly classified programs. That would be great if it weren't for one thing. Colorado Springs has a real space problem. Literally, there's not enough space for your required personnel numbers on Peterson Air Force Base, which does offer force protection. Are there any SpaceCom functions being run out of trailers currently in Colorado?
Congressman, on Peterson Space Force Base, next to Building 1, which is where my headquarters is, we have some mobile facilities that are being utilized as SCIFs. But those mobile facilities are inside the security of Peterson.
Thank you. Aren't you lacking sufficient backup power for multiple buildings?
So we, in terms of the power consumption, the power redundancy, if you will, we're working through that now.
Thank you. Aren't there over 1,000 personnel working at two separate facilities, 4.5 miles and another one 10 miles away from Peterson Space Force Base with zero force protection, not even a concrete barrier? Is that true?
So the facilities there, Congressman, have been certified by the external agencies for their ability to do the functions we're asking them to do, whether it's SCIFs or whether it's the...
Do they have protection in front of those buildings to keep threats away?
No, they do not.
Thank you. It is just unbelievable that these conditions would be deemed acceptable or appropriate for a four-star command. In Huntsville, Space Command would immediately have move-in ready facilities, and within 24 months, a brand new 400,000 square foot facility, all within secured Redstone Gateway, and this is before the construction of the permanent headquarters, not to mention Alabama, in their proposal, was going to build and donate new general officer housing. That would have eliminated a $1.5 million purchase for you in that new farm that you bought. Secretary Kendall, in your statement, you were very clear Space Command's current temporary facility must be replaced and new buildings are required. And that is your judgment. Based off findings of the strategic base team, that Huntsville was more competitive and just as capable of hosting the permanent headquarters. Isn't it a fact that the Air Force found we could save $426 million by moving to Huntsville rather than staying in Colorado?
That's an accurate number. It'd be offset by cost of mitigation, however, to some extent.
Is it true that construction in Alabama is easily 30% or more cost effective than Colorado? Is that true?
That's approximately what our data shows.
Is it also true that maintenance of facilities in Alabama are approximately the same savings for maintenance of buildings in Alabama versus Colorado?
I believe that's roughly correct.
Out of the 6 locations considered for Space Command, which one had the higher construction cost estimated? Which one had a higher construction cost estimated than Colorado?
Colorado Springs was highest.
It was the highest. Was there any facility that was higher to build in than Colorado?
I don't believe there was among the 6 candidates.
Thank you. Isn't the housing allowance substantially higher in Colorado than Alabama? Is that a true statement?
I'd have to check that one for the record. I think it's probably true.
It is true. And the people wonder why we have a $33 trillion debt. I think these decisions right here are exactly what the people of America are focusing on. It's because of decisions like this which ignore the facts and the expense of the American taxpayer. That's who's paying the bill. Isn't it true that the Air Force found that the alleged operational risk shared by General Dixon could easily be mitigated? Is that true that it could be easily mitigated?
I don't think the word easily was ever used. There were mitigations available.
Thank you. Did Space Command ever consider these mitigation efforts in the risk assessment?
In their initial assessment, no. You've been provided with some of those documents, I believe. But in conversations with my staff, they were discussed.
A lot of documents you provided us reference the May 2022 Spacecom sensitivity analysis. However, this document hasn't been provided to this committee. That's exactly the point I want. We would love that documentation that's been referenced, but this committee can't get a copy of it. Was any of the information I just asked included in that analysis? We don't have it.
I think you do have it. I think in my briefing in the backup charts, there's one that talks about the cost of mitigation and the estimates that Space Command had and that my staff had.
Well, I know that we've been trying to get. I hope it's in there, and that will answer some of these questions. Will you commit to getting the committee, as you have said, if we don't have this, will you commit to getting every member of this committee a copy of that analysis?
I can't do that. That's deliberative materials. I'd have to review that before we could do that.
General Dickinson.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Kendall, the last couple of weeks we've been talking in the subcommittee for tactical air and land rather, about the next generation air dominance and what it'll take, of course, to win moving forward. And what we're going to do, we're going to need to be, if we're going to stay number one, you would agree that we need to have these 5th generation fighters so we can have air superiority, right? Basic.
Yeah, we have a large number of modernization programs that we need to move forward with. Next generation air dominance is one of them.
Secretary, if we got into a conflict with China with, say, the 4th best fighter aircraft, would that be problematic?
I think any disadvantage relative to China or any other adversary would be problematic.
We would struggle then if we weren't number one, if we didn't have the best.
We always strive to have superiority of our
Of course, we're the United
adversaries.
States military. We want to be number one, and we have been for almost 100 years now. Is U.S. Spacecom important to our future?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you would agree with me that we want to have the best. We don't want to be 4th or 5th. We want to be number one.
We want to have the most ready capability that we can.
Yeah. General Dickinson, are you okay with not having the best resources and equipment available?
No, I want the best resources and equipment.
Absolutely. So you wouldn't want to be 4th or 5th best. You want to be number one.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So while I'm not thrilled that San Antonio didn't get awarded and chosen, but this was a study, and San Antonio didn't come out on top, did they, Secretary Kendall?
No, it did not.
No. Colorado Springs didn't come on top either, did it?
It did not come out on top for some of the criteria that we used, particularly
Well,
cost.
yeah, I mean, it seems like fourth or fifth. I think it may be something, because there was a points value, and Colorado Springs scored 9 points below. Is that accurate?
I'm not sure what you're referring to that, Carl.
In the basing decision. They, in fact, was the Huntsville scored, the chasm between Huntsville and Colorado Springs was greater than Colorado Springs and the last.
Yeah, I think you're referring to the earlier basing decision analysis that went
Yeah.
into, that was covered in the IG report, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I don't recall the point differences in
And
that
what
early
I felt
assessment.
interesting hearing some of the parts of this committee hearing, the available workforce, according to the study, Huntsville, Alabama was #1. I didn't do the study, y'all did. It's ranked at #1.
Now, there was a reason based on those criteria that my recommendation would have been Huntsville.
Yeah.
But there were operational reasons why Colorado would have been a preferred location.
I think it's a blatant political decision because the guy down the street, the people in Colorado vote for him, and not enough people in Alabama do. And we continue to have this kind of political garbage infect our military. We're risking #1. I don't want American generals. I don't want Republican generals. I don't want Democratic generals. I want American generals. And to put our best interests as a nation and not be infected with this politics. And I yield the balance of my time to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I do want to follow up with a couple of things. One, my friend and colleague from Colorado Springs asked earlier, did President Biden have the authority as commander-in-chief to come in and interject himself? And each of you answered yes. He didn't see it that way when it was President Trump. In fact, he called for an inspector general's inspection for abuse of power, and so I find that rich. But my friend from Georgia asked the Secretary this question: could you remember in recent years any president usurping the authority on a basing decision? And you said you couldn't. I've been on this committee 21 years. It has not happened, because I guarantee you, whichever members from the state that it did happen to would have been yelping, just like I'm yelping. This just does not happen. And so, and as I opened this hearing, it's very disturbing on its face when we have this kind of nationwide competitions and this kind of circumvention comes up at the end, which can only be described as political. With that, we will now go to who's next. Mr. Lalotta of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, I'm not from Alabama. I'm not from Colorado. I'm proud to be from New York, sir. And we New Yorkers have a good nose for when something smells pretty funky, and this deal smells mighty funky. Following a defined process with innumerable criteria and metrics aimed to take politics out of the process, Alabama was chosen multiple ranks ahead of Colorado. Yet Colorado was ultimately chosen, and it's clear this committee, both Republicans and Democrats, are skeptical of how 5th place was chosen over 1st place. And that smells mighty funky. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to my good friend, Mr. Strong, who's going to elicit some more facts to inform the committee.
Jennifer from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Lalotta. You know, a couple of things here. It's funny how you mention both sides of the aisle for questioning this. General Dixon, I just thought of this. In 2005, the Missile Defense Agency went through a BRAC. We were told many would not relocate to Huntsville. General Dixon, I believe you were a 2-star general in Huntsville at that time. Do you remember how that relocation worked out?
Congressman, I don't believe I was part of the Missile Defense Agency at that time.
Okay. Well, I can tell you this right here. We were told that the relocation wouldn't work, and I believe that history shows that it was probably the largest percentage to relocate because of how things were handled, greater than 60%, and it was a defining moment. And I can tell you this right here, that the MDA in Huntsville, Alabama is alive and well and doing a phenomenal job for our country.
Congressman, if I could, I might have been part of MDA right now. I can't recall the exact years I was there.
Okay. Secretary Kendall, in your statement, you were very clear about, I tell you what, I'm going to yield back for just a second. Mr. Chairman, I've got to look at something here. I want to be sure that it's factual before I do this.
Okay, gentleman yields back. Chair now goes to the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. McCormick, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hopefully I'll be less than 5 minutes here. I think we pretty much addressed the location issues ad nauseum. So I want to take a little bit of a different tack, if you don't mind. There's some supply chain issues that we had recently. In 2014, the National Defense Authorization Act reduced the import restrictions on purchase of Russian RD-180 rocket engines. In March of 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine, the Russians suspended shipments of the RD-180 and no longer serviced the 24 currently held by the U.S. government. I know this is probably outside the purview you're prepared to answer. The problem this presents is that this rocket engine is used by the United States, or the United Launch Alliance's Atlas V. Secretary Kendall, how has your department worked to mitigate this disruption in the RD-180 supply chain?
I'm familiar with the RD-180 from my previous role as Undersecretary for Acquisition Technology and Logistics. We basically worked as hard as good, and Chairman Rogers will remember this, to get off the RD-180 as quickly as we could. At an earlier era when relations with Russia were different, we developed that dependency. I am not current on how many of those engines we have left, but I believe that we're moving forward with an alternative engine. I'll have to get you a more current answer for the record.
Is that, in general, is the supply chain becoming problematic?
We've had supply chain issues in general, particularly in space, with some of the components that, not so much from Russia, but just in general with the supply chain. And we've had to manage those to work through some risks there.
Okay. General Saltzman, I'll be quick. Can you explain how Space Force collaborated with the commercial partners to purchase space location data that is often more accurate than that of our government, and what advantages that provide? In other words, and I can give you background on that if you'd like. I think you're familiar. Okay. So Space Policy Directive 3 transferred responsibility from civilian space situational awareness from Space Force to the Department of Commerce. I think you're probably familiar with that. Then the Office of Space Commerce has been setting up traffic coordination systems for space, the TRAC system. And then when the transfer is behind schedule, even in the early stages, from my understanding, this new system is merely replicating what the Space Force did previously. And so in regards to that, can you explain how we're collaborating with commercial industries and how that's either interfering with what you're trying to do, which is tracking, or actually enhancing that, and how can we do better?
I certainly don't think it's interfering with. We're working closely with the Department of Commerce to make sure they have the capabilities, the training, the expertise, the procedural aspects to make sure they can do the space traffic management piece of that space domain awareness mission. So far, I think they are on track, and we've had good conversations. We're just still early in the process, and so therefore we have to, as the Space Force, keep track of all those objects on orbit.
About how long do you think that transition is going to take?
I don't have a good timeline for you, Congressman.
Okay. Thank you. With that, I yield.
Chair now goes back to Representative Strong for the balance of his 3 minutes. He said he's now ready to exhaust that. So
Thank you. General Dickinson, how long did this meeting last in the White House when you recommended Colorado to the president? How long did that meeting last?
Congressman, I can't speak to that.
Thank you. General Dixon, for Space Command headquarters, you haven't recommended the most qualified location, Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, not the second most qualified in New Mexico, or even the third most qualified in Nebraska. You've stalled when you've been asked the hard questions. You gave a brief to members of Congress that appears to be misleading. You looked us straight in the face and said you couldn't imagine a circumstance where you would recommend Peterson to be Space Command's headquarters. I believe the facts you think the facts of more than 3 years showing delay. I believe everybody here knows who's interfering. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Missouri, Mr. Alford, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you to our witnesses for coming in today. I echo what the Chairman and many of my colleagues have said here in this hearing today in voicing their frustration over this administration's decision to move Space Command headquarters from Huntsville to Colorado Springs. On January 13th of 21, Huntsville, Alabama was selected as the preferred permanent location. President Biden and his administration reneged on that decision, decided to move the headquarters from Alabama to Colorado. This was not about selecting the best location. It was purely politics, the politics of abortion in America. I want to go over a timeline with you of what has transpired. In May of 2020, the competition reopened. In January of 2021, Huntsville, Alabama was selected. In June 24th of 2022, Alabama abortion ban went into effect. In March of 2023, Senator Tuberville of Alabama began holding up promotions until the Department of Defense changed its abortion travel reimbursement policy. On July 31st of 2023, President Biden overrode the two-site selection contest, and that is where we are. Mr. Secretary, do you know the abortion policy for Colorado?
I do not, and I want to respond to your allegation there.
Let me get through, and then we'll have time to respond. But do you know the abortion policy for Colorado?
I do not.
Well, it's legal in almost any circumstance up until the moment of birth. Do you know the abortion policy for Alabama?
I do not.
It is illegal. So here we have a situation, and I'm not doubting your veracity and what you're saying here today based on what you believe. The General is the same with you on why this decision was made. But don't you think that this is an odd set of circumstances when you look at the timeline that this issue of abortion in America and placing this important headquarters in a state that allows abortion up until time of birth and taking it away as a punitive measure against Senator Tuberville and against the state of Alabama, which has outlawed abortion in that state. How can that not be part of the president's thinking when we know that he is in favor of abortion in America?
Let me be clear. I know in general that abortion is more restricted in Alabama than Colorado, but I don't know any of the details of that. This debating decision, to my knowledge, was never affected in any way by considerations about abortion. That was never discussed in any conversation that I had.
Well, the president's not going to do that in even a setting, and I know you can't reveal what is talked about in great detail with the president of the United States, but he's not going to say, oh, I'm going to not give Alabama this headquarters because I believe in abortion. I want a state that has unlimited abortion up until the time of birth. He's not going to do that. He's going to come up with some other reason, funding issues, convenience, not wanting to relocate for other reasons. This is very disturbing. I think it's disturbing to Americans that this process, when the fifth place is elevated to a winning status, two competitions. And so once again, Mr. Secretary and Generals, I'm not doubting your veracity and your truthfulness in this committee. I am doubting the President of the United States and his motives to fund the abortion industry in America and to place this important headquarters in a state that allows abortion up until birth. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Now is it Waltz? Yes, sir. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Mr. Waltz from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, I think you would agree that child care, quality of schools, quality of life considerations are important to readiness as a general matter. I mean, those are things that this department has repeatedly said, including diversity, as Ms. Sewell said.
Yes, Congressman, they are a consideration.
Right. So just so we're clear on the disparity here of the objective process and how badly Colorado scored, we have energy resilience, 5th, less than Alabama. We have child care, 3rd, less than Alabama. We have quality of schools, 4th, less than Alabama. We have cost of living, Last, way less than Alabama. We have affordable housing, which many people on both sides of the aisle say is a critical issue. Last, less than Alabama. But even on the more, kind of readiness and operational focus, we've got communications infrastructure. Last, available qualified workforce. Last. I can go down, or less, excuse me, than Huntsville. I can go down an objective list. I think my colleague is right, absolutely right. This is about politics. Even on the diversity issue, which I've been loud and clear that we need to make decisions based on meritocracy and merit. But even on a diversity issue, as my Democrat colleague pointed out, Colorado is far less diverse than Alabama, as Major League Baseball figured out when they made a politicized decision to move the All-Star game. So when President Trump decided to put this in Alabama, it was based on an objective process. And members of this committee and the media howled and cried that it was all about politics. So we had multiple, as in your administration came in, Secretary Kendall, we had multiple checks on it, all of which validated it was an objective process to put it in Alabama. However, this decision then gets pulled out of your hands, overrides your recommendation, overrides an objective process, pulled into the White House, and I think the American people have common sense to know what happened. Colorado's a blue state, both senators are Democrats, the governor's a Democrat, and at the same time, as my colleague pointed out, you have Senator Tuberville making his stand, and you have state law changing as it comes to abortion. Mr. Chairman, this is common sense. What happened here. This was a politicized process on a basing decision for a critical command that's never happened before in modern American history, and we need to call it out. Mr. Chairman, I support you in stopping this. But what's also at issue here is that we're allowing services in this Pentagon are now making personnel decisions based on state law put forward by elected officials. If we could put this up, and this is what I want to ask you about, Mr. Secretary. You had a 3-star general, General Burt, openly state in the wake of the state of Florida saying we shouldn't have sexualized material for 5 to 8-year-olds, which I would hope most people, I know most people agree with, but at a gay pride event said she would put less qualified people if they had concerns about this state law. Do you agree with that approach? Do you disagree with her statement?
Let me be clear
I would
about.
hope that would be an easy yes.
She was, I think, addressing a hypothetical. I'm talking about a potential impact.
No, she said, Mr.
General
Secretary,
Burt
she
made
said
some-
this right after what the media unfairly and wrongly labeled "Don't Say Gay." Then she speaks at this event and says, you know what, if they have concerns about this and don't feel like, we have a quote here, they can be themselves, she'll put less qualified people, Cape Canaveral is pretty important to the Space Force, into Florida.
Yeah, I've read the transcript of what she said, and it's as you say, but I think she was still addressing a hypothetical or potential case.
Just the DOD instruction 1350, service members are evaluated only on individual merit, fitness, capability, and performance.
That's correct.
That's it. That's absolutely correct. So this is then incorrect. That is not in accordance with DOD policy. Do you agree?
I don't think she was talking about how to evaluate people. She was talking about a possible impact.
I am compelled to consider a different candidate and perhaps less qualified. She sits on general officer boards. That is an outrageous statement for our readiness, and yet she's still in the job, correct?
She is, and she realizes that she said some things that she should not have said. And she loves.
Do you agree that she should not have said that?
I agree that she did say some things about state laws that were misleading. We do not keep track of state laws.
Thank you,
we
Mr.
do not
Secretary.
assign people
Here's the
based on
slippery
that.
slope, and Mr. Chairman, if you can indulge, here's the slippery slope. We can have a department in a future administration that allows members to say, you know what, I don't feel safe because of gun control laws here and out of control crime, and therefore, Space Force, I want to go somewhere else, and that needs to be considered. This and other things like this basing decision have opened a Pandora's box of political issues that this administration, this president, and this Pentagon have allowed to open, and we don't know where that's going to go except to hurt our military. Mr. Chairman, we have to put a stop to it. Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, for 5 minutes.
I'm going to follow up on Mr. Waltz's comments because I think they were directly on point. So you say that this, I appreciate, you've been a straight shooter with us, Mr. Secretary. When stuff gets said that's not right, you say, that's not right, that's not what we should be doing. So I appreciate that you say that this isn't how we should think about these things and that General Byrd understands that she made a mistake. But like, when you say things that aren't true or that are a mistake, you usually have to correct them. Has General Byrd said anything to correct this?
I don't know that she has. General Saltzman?
Right, so that's the problem, right? Again, I do appreciate you being a straight shooter and saying this is not reflective of how our military should think about our service members, but I would just encourage you that, like, if you as the civilian leader of the United States Air Force have this perspective, and a general has a different perspective and they're sharing it, we got to align those. And I want to align them with your view because I think it's the right one, but that does require a little bit of a remediation of the thing that has happened that is wrong. And that brings us to the substance of this hearing, because we have to remediate punishing Alabama. And that really is what is going on here. When you listen to Mr. Strong and others lay out, Alabama was like first in everything, Colorado was last in everything, and I believe Alabama is being punished because of their abortion policy. I believe they're being punished because they don't adhere to the radical gender ideology that has infected DOD. And I think they're being punished because the senior senator from Alabama has got these military holds. That is the most obvious explanation, but I do want to be open-minded if there's any other. So, General Dickinson, I want you to bring us in the room. When you made the recommendation to President Biden to forego the objective process based on merit and instead just revert to Colorado, when Mr. Strong asked you how long that meeting lasted, you declined to answer. Why is that?
Congressman, I can't talk about a deliberative type of setting meeting that was conducted for the basing decision.
So you can't even tell us how long the meeting occurred?
I cannot.
Were there notes taken at the meeting?
So, Congressman, I wasn't there. I didn't brief the president.
Oh, okay. So who did?
I can't talk to that.
See, this is where the American people start to lose confidence because we have a thing that we can actually see, where there was ratings and metrics, and Alabama won the thing you couldn't see. But then there's this other thing that you can't see, and Alabama just loses that. And my worry is that this is about depriving a red state of mission. And we should not do that. And I don't just see it in Alabama. This is the capstone example of what's going on, but I see it in my state. I see it in my community, where mission with no real base, like there are these phony bases that are put out, but then when I ask what the basis is in writing, what analysis has been done, that doesn't really happen. So what could you say to the American people that are in red states, that love our military, that want to host mission, who believe that abortion or gender policies are affecting whether or not they're able to make that contribution to the fight and the national defense?
So, Congressman, what I did is I provided my best military advice to Secretary Kendall, which I've provided to the committee as well.
But why does your best military advice seem to run contrary to all of the objective analysis that the American people are able to see?
As a combatant commander, my job is to make sure that I am able to conduct and execute the UCP missions given by the President of the United States. So operational readiness and our ability to do those functions is what I do as a combatant commander.
Right, but when in toto, the analysis we've done would point us to Redstone Arsenal in Alabama, and we ignore that analysis, does that maybe lead us to believe that the analysis was just a performance in the first place?
Congressman, I provided my best military advice.
Right, but what the American people don't understand is when you got folks in somewhat of a clandestine process giving their best military advice, and on the other side you have an objective process that you all just ignore, do you see how it would reduce the trust the American people have in the decision-making process when those things are so incongruent?
I would offer that I think the American people would trust me in the execution of the duties that I've been given by the President.
But don't you think it would enhance the trust that the people would have in whatever your best military advice is if there was objective information that backed it up, rather than offering your best military advice that runs contrary to all of the objective information?
Well, my viewpoint is a little bit different in the sense that I'm executing these operational type of missions that have risks that are associated with it.
I think that the operational mission that the DoD is engaged on is that you all want to become an abortion travel agency. And it is right that the president can put this thing wherever he wants to put it, but then we can decide what to fund. And I think that there's something really rotten in Denmark here, and I'm glad we're having this hearing. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Colorado for any final statements he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to say to my friend from Florida and others who've repeatedly said that there was an objective process that came out with Huntsville #1. And you didn't hear me earlier, Mr. Gates, but on page 19 of the Inspector General report for the Department of Defense, and I'm going to ask to have this entire report put into the hearing record with unanimous consent. Okay, it's dated May 11th, 2022, and they quote the decision matrix as it stood a day or two before the meeting with President Trump in the White House in January of 2021. So this is the matrix as it was updated on January 10th of 2021. And they go over mission as a decision factor, and a lot went into that. They go into infrastructure capacity, and a lot goes into that. Community support, child care, education, spousal opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. They go into that. Costs to DOD, they go into that, and then they add a fifth element, mission impacts to full operational capability. With this updated fifth category, they come to a different conclusion. The summary says the numerical values in this section for each location summarizes the net pros and cons for each location. This assessment supports the selection of Colorado Springs as the preferred alternative and Huntsville as the feasible alternative. So those two cities.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
So is the gentleman concerned that for Colorado Springs to move up, a new category had to be added and the rules of the game had to be changed during the game?
No, I'll take you back my time. No, I'm not at all surprised or perturbed, because that should have been there from the beginning. Getting military advice as to operational capability or readiness should have been the first thing for all along. It should have been the top factor all along, and I'm glad it was added, even if it was belatedly. So it's incorrect when people say Colorado Springs was 4 or 5, or et cetera, et cetera. And I've heard that repeatedly. On January 10th of 2021, Colorado Springs was the preferred alternative. So I just want to set the record straight. This entire report is now in the hearing record. Everyone can look at it. And I wanted to point that out because there is not this conspiracy to overturn a merit-based approach. When different factors are considered, different results in different cities came up to the top. And right before the White House meeting, Colorado Springs was on top. And so a lot of assumptions based on what a different narrative would assume are simply wrong. Colorado Springs was not number 4 or number 5. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
That's just not accurate. Colorado Springs came in 5th. I love you, Doug. That's not accurate. Listen, I started off this hearing explaining that the whole purpose of the hearing was to emphasize that there is no impact on operational readiness to build a new permanent headquarters in some place other than Colorado Springs. Specifically in this situation, Huntsville, Alabama 1, I think we demonstrated in the first part of this hearing, the one thing that General Dickinson had indicated in his concerns expressed to the Secretary, which were then later picked up by the President, is that some of the civilians may not want to move. And as we have made clear here, he can use contractors to fill that void if he has to, or his successor can. They got 5 years to get ready for it. There is going to be no impact. And plus, day-to-day operational readiness is being conducted almost exclusively by the Air Force anyway. Secretary Kendall made it clear he factored this in. There are mitigating circumstances. There is no effect on operational readiness. So, what I want to point out about where we are now is we don't live in a monarchy. We live in a constitutional republic. The president doesn't get to just from high on decide this is the way it's going to be, and we all just sit by and say, yes, sir. Those in his employ must do that. But we are an equal branch. The judicial branch, the legislative branch now gets its say-so. The president can intervene and tell his department personnel what he wants to do. Congress gets to decide what we're going to authorize and what we're going to pay for. It is my intent to make sure that the competition results are honored and that the permanent basing headquarters are authorized and funded to be constructed in Huntsville, Alabama. And during that period of time, the provisional headquarters in Colorado Springs is fully funded until that completion is made. But we have seen some real concerns raised here today. There is no reason to justify what's happened other than, in my view, political considerations. So I'm going to do what my colleague from Colorado Springs, his delegation did when they felt like President Trump had incorrectly intervened, and I'm going to ask the Inspector General from the Department of Defense to investigate this. In the meantime, I intend to work to make sure that no funds are authorized or expended to be spent in Colorado Springs for the building of a permanent headquarters. And with that, I thank the witnesses for their time and their contributions and the members for their participation. This hearing is adjourned.